you picked up the newspaper, it said Cartoon Wars, right? Didn't it say Cartoon Wars?
It's called Cartoon
and it
Wars.
was like, my first thought was like, oh, God. Oh, we did. You know what I mean? Like, we did it.
Well, it said Muslims very upset
Yeah, it was like,
over racist cartoon. And we're like, oh, they
crap,
figured
that's
us out. Oh, no.
So most of the time, if it's anything like that, we just instantly assume it's us because there's been many times where there has been a lot of times where we've opened up the paper, pulled up the Drudge Report or something, and it's like, South Park does this, and you're like, oh, God, what do we do? And you find out from the paper, or the internet in real time.
Usually when a cartoon makes people angry, it's us.
So
we were actually kind of jealous. We were angry that someone else had stolen our thunder.
So you got even by doing a South Park Muslim
we're like,
cartoon
okay, well,
episode.
let's do it. We took it back from the damn Danish.
We said, we're going to do that. If anybody's going to get mad at us,
After you did the episode, Comedy Central, which broadcasts your show, which shows South Park, was pretty upset about it, and you ended up having to pull a scene.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, because of the nature of our show, a lot of people by now kind of know that we really do the show almost like a live show, almost like a Saturday Night Live kind of schedule, where we come in on a Thursday and say, all right, what are we doing this week? And then that episode airs the next Wednesday. And so it's funny because in our show, what happens then all the time is basically what's going on that week is what ends up going on in the show. And so with that episode, we're saying, okay, and at the end, we're going to show the image of Muhammad. And Comedy Central's like, well, no, you're not. And we're like, no, but you see, we have to because this is the point we're making is that it, and we kept being this fight. And so then the fight ended up getting put into the show. And then as we're writing, we're like, okay, let's put the head of the network in there and have him, it's just like, It's always kind of as we're living it that the show gets made.
And we sent them the show. We said, okay, you can pull it out, but we're going to put a thing that says you pulled it out right here.
Right.
And
you can pull it out, but
that,
we're not going to.
Yeah, and we're not going to. And then we worked it into the show.
You want to describe what the wording was on the...
Well, all it was, I mean, I can't remember exactly what we said, but the whole original idea, too, was that we said, they're so upset that they showed an image of Muhammad, which was so funny because we had actually done it like 3 years before that on South Park. We had Muhammad in this episode called Super Best Friends.
There's an image of Muhammad in the head credits of South Park, which is on every episode of South Park that airs in like 100 countries, and it airs in syndication all over the country.
And so they said you cannot show an image of Muhammad. And we're like, okay, well, so we're going to do it again, and then we said, but we could get attacked by terrorists if we do that. So let's make it look like it was Family Guy and not us. So then that gave us the whole idea for the show that we would put Family Guy in the show and only have Muhammad appear in the Family Guy part. So if they ever saw a still of it on the internet or they ever saw anything, they'd know it was Family Guy, not us. Yeah. And then they would get bombed.
We're pretty tough, but we're not really that tough.
Yeah, no.
So I'm sure you know about this, that one of the recent news stories that involve South Park has to do with Blackwater, the very controversial, always in the news, private security company that is under investigation and had a big presence in Iraq. And the story is that Blackwater managed to divert hundreds of weapons from a U.S. weapons bunker in Afghanistan to equip Afghan policemen. And on at least one occasion, somebody claiming to work for Blackwater signed for a weapons shipment using the name Eric Cartman, who is, of course, a character from South Park. So when you read something like this in the news, are you flattered? Like, yeah, it's a shout-out to one of our characters, or are you appalled?
I think our first instinct is always, how do we put this in the show?
Yeah, we've already been talking about how we can work that into a show.
Anytime we read anything remotely interesting, we try to think how we could put it in the show, and so especially if it's about ourselves. But when I read that, I had a small feeling of just like, oh, I think Cartman actually did that. He seems very real to me, and so I think maybe that really was him.
Yeah, how do we know it wasn't him?
South Park is frequently topical. So I want to play an excerpt from a show that aired in season 13, which was the last season. This is an episode that was called Margaritaville. This was basically your take on the financial meltdown. But of course, it has to be seen through a third grader's eyes. So Stan goes into the bank where he has $100, and he meets the banker. And so here's the banker and Stan. That's really funny. But I love the idea of Stan going to the bank and trying to deposit his $100, and then poof, it's gone.
Yeah, that was that was actually, it's one of those things. The way we always kind of do shows is way more like kind of sculpting, because we we'll start on Thursday or Friday, and we'll sometimes just. I think we started doing sort of more of the God metaphor stuff first. And then as that kept going, it got kind of trippier and trippier. We're like, all right, we need something to just really be a runner through this that's just more present day, what's going on. And
something grounding.
Sort of,
something kind of start in a real place, you know.
Then added on all the stuff with Stan. And that's how shows go a lot. Sometimes we'll write the end first. Sometimes we write the beginning first. And sometimes we write the middle first.
Yeah, and that scene is definitely like your whole life. You're told if you just put money in the bank, it'll go up in value.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Now, the characters in South Park, after 15 years, have advanced from third grade to fourth grade, but
they're not doing too good.
They're not too good. But you, on the other hand, have gotten 15 years older in the interim. So do you see the world differently than you did when you started writing the show? And are you writing the characters from a different point of view?
I would love to say yes, but I don't think we've really grown up.
Haven't matured at all.
We're still basically doing fart jokes.
Yeah, thanks for rubbing it on our face. But
no, I mean, I think we've. I mean, it's really funny when we look back, especially even now when we look back at seasons 3 and 4. You know, it used to be when we look back at seasons 1 and 2, we were just like, oh my God, we had no idea what we were doing. That's not funny. That's not well written, because it was really through the process of doing the movies, you know, especially like the South Park movie, and then doing other stuff like that really, where we learned really how to be writers. We didn't really know how to do that. We were just kind of faking it. And we also, through the years, we got really into the writing side of it. Like we never sit in our writer's room and crack jokes. It's just not what we're about. We really sit there and really try to think through stuff that is just cool over the whole 20 minute. That's like more conceptual, and we just get into that stuff way more now than we did when we were, 26.
But it's still all in service of fart jokes. So
yeah,
it's like elegant fart jokes now.
Yeah,
it's like finely tuned fart jokes. We're better at writing those.
The first episode was kind of geared around fart jokes.
Yes, right, absolutely.
Were those jokes like really important to you when you were in third grade?
Oh, of course.
Yeah, I mean that was all you had to joke about because you hadn't had sex yet, isn't it? It's all you have is poo and farts.
That was your sexual life.
It's just poo and farts. So that's like the biggest thing you got going. That's the most subversive thing you can talk about.
Why do you want to see the world from the point of view of fourth graders?
Well, it started off as really just a, way back in '97 when we started this, it really felt like it was still at a time when so much of the entertainment that was coming out was all about, the innocence of a child, and if we could only see the world through the eyes of children, and if we could just all be children again. And we were kind of going, all right, well, we were children not that long ago, and I don't remember me or anyone else being that cool. like we were pretty much little bastards, that needed. And so we're like, well, no, let's do a show where kids are really the way kids really are. And that was really one of the big ideas of the show, is let's just have kids talk the way they talk. And, and back then, way back in the dark ages when we started this, that's sort of what people really responded to, was like, whoa, what's this? And so, and now I think there's also an added element where it's always nice because kids can have an opinion that's always kind of in the middle. And so many of the shows, it's not, the formula is not that, hard to find. I mean, it really is that we take an issue and we sort of always have two sides about to kill each other over it, and the boys in the middle doing fart jokes and saying, who cares? This is, you're both crazy. And that's what's nice too. And then in terms of Cartman, it's great because we always thought of him as a little Archie Bunker, and we always loved Archie Bunker as a character. And again, we felt like in the 90s, you just were like, man, you could not have a character like that on TV anymore because the show would get canceled in a week. And we're like, yeah, but maybe not if that character was an 8-year-old, because people forgive 8-year-olds because he's 8, so. Right.
Yeah, so I mean, Cartman's anti-Semitic. He's homophobic. He's
all that good stuff.
All that
good stuff. It just has a different. It just isn't quite as. I mean, we can make it. We make him pretty venomous, but it just isn't. It's just something you can still laugh at because it's this little fat, funny-looking kid.
Yeah.
Where if it was an adult doing that, it's just a different kind of humor.
Trey, you do the voices of Stan and Cartman. Can you tell us how you came up with those voices?
Even in film class, Matt and I would talk with just kind of this annoying, high-pitched voice and make our film teachers angry.
We thought it was funny, and kind of nobody else did, basically.
Yeah. And what we did at the time, I remember,
was the voice?
we Well, I mean, it was basically all the voices of the kids. But what's funny is that we do the voices. Back then, we did the voice, and then it was on analog tape. God, this is weird to talk about.
So
it was
weird,
on,
right?
It was on analog tape.
We had a 4-track,
and we
you
took
pitch
this
it.
thing and bent the thing to pitch it up. Because the truth is, if I were to do Stan right now or to do Cartman, it wouldn't sound like him. Because of course now it's all digital, but we do the voices, and then they take the waveform and they pitch it up exactly 3 semitones, which is what we now know kind of sounds like a kid. 2 semitones can make you sound kind of like a woman, and 4 makes you sound like Terrence and Phillip. It's
6 makes you sound like a chipmunk.
Yeah.
So is there?
It is weird, yeah.
What's the difference between how you do Stan and how you do Cartman?
It's funny too, because I've noticed with a lot of cartoons, but it's funny to look back at the first few seasons and how much different it was. Because it used to just be all through and just puffing my chest out and really going like that. You couldn't even understand what he was saying, So now it's just through the years he's gotten this little accent, and there's just certain words that he pronounces a certain way for no reason, and little nuances that and there'll be plenty of times we catch ourselves that I'll do Stan's voice and I'm like, oh wait, that sounded like Cartman, and because they're not
close.
that different. It's just one's kind of more through my nose and has a few different accents on words, and the other one's just pretty much my voice talking high.
And Matt, do you want to say anything about doing the voices that you do?
No, just that I'm not very good at voices, so it's lucky
You do
that
Kyle.
I do it on
You do Kyle.
Yeah, I
you
do
do
Kyle.
Kenny.
Well, Kyle and Stan are basically me and Trey doing the exact same voice. It's just that they're slightly different. Kenny is speaking to my hand. It's a brilliant technique.
It's always the funniest thing because if I'm wasted enough, like at a party, and people come in like, do a voice. I was like, okay, who do you want? They always say Kenny, and I'm like, okay, I don't do Kenny. And why do you want Kenny? All that is talking into your hand.
Matt, do Kenny. This is the perfect setup. Now you got to do Kenny.
Oh yeah.
I'm talking to
Okay,
your
what
hand.
you do? Take your hand. You hold your fingers together and you put it over your mouth like this. And you can just cut it up like this. Amazing.
Isn't that
amazing?
Incredible voice. The way you can just change his voice like that. But I mean, I really love, the favorite times we have, even writing, but also in the room recording, is when we're being Cartman and Butters. Because we just know, those are just times we almost know every time we're going to get in there, we're going to do it in one take, because we just know exactly how those two kids are around each other.
Those are two characters that are and you can almost give them normal lines that aren't funny, and they can become funny. Both those characters are just inherently super funny. Those are the funnest shows. Those are the most fun shows to do, is Cartman and Butters.
You guys were friends before you started working on South Park. Did you know each other back in grade school?
No. We met in college.
Okay.
Yeah, we were. We both went to CU. We both grew up in Colorado, and we both went to CU Boulder. Because that was the school that basically you went to if you grew up in Colorado. That's all I remember, is the only one school I applied to. And we met just like in filmmaking class, in the summer.
And it was in filmmaking class that you teamed up and did a couple of shorts that became the prototype.
Yeah, we
for
really
South Park.
we really bonded over Monty Python. That was the first thing that in our film class, it was all people who wanted to be Kurosawa and Martin Scorsese, and they had their taxi driver that they were trying to write in Colorado, and they were going to produce it for $600 somehow. But we were just constantly doing Monty Python sketches, and so that's kind of how we met. And then we started doing shorts because, it sounds like what I was saying, back in the dark ages of the early 90s, there wasn't any really digital video, and you had to get film stock and shoot it, and that was expensive. So you really couldn't afford anything but a short. And something kind of great about that, because you had to say, okay, well, we can only do something that's 3 minutes long. How do you make something really good in 3 minutes? And that's kind of all we did when we started.
If you hadn't been assigned to do animation for your film class, would you have ever thought of animation?
It's funny, we actually weren't assigned it at all.
I thought you were. Oh, okay.
And well, no, actually that's not true. I was in an animation class, and at the end of it, you could either write an essay or make an animated film. And Matt and I weren't in that class together. And so that was the first time I worked with construction paper. But again, it was just basically doing Terry Gilliam kind of stuff. And it was so crappy. I mean, it's even way worse looking than South Park. And I got nominated for a Student Academy Award for it, which was just ridiculous. Because if you see it, it's so bad. But then sort of using that same style. And really the only reason was because since the film screenings were always at the end of the semester, it was always right around Christmas time for the fall semester, and so it was like, it's Christmas time. Let's do a little thing for the festival, just for people to get a little. And we just made this little thing with Frosty the Snowman and these 4 boys, and thought really nothing of it except that we wanted to, just really make people laugh and have these little kids cussing and talking about Christmas, and it was just for that's all we thought of it. And then a producer at Fox ended up seeing that and saying, "Hey, I want to send this out as my Christmas card." Okay. And like a year later was like, "Hey, go make another one of those." And we're like, "Okay." And again, just we were not thinking anything of, didn't even put our names on it because we didn't think anything of it. And then that just ended up being the thing. It was crazy.
How did you get from there to Comedy Central?
Because the guy, the producer at Fox, who was Brian Graydon, he copied it, and it's so funny to talk about this stuff because
he dubbed
this
it
is
on
back in the day where you
VCRs,
had to dub it on VCRs. There was no YouTube. There was no. So he just dubbed 100 copies onto VCR tapes, and the next thing we knew, the tapes were getting copied and copied and copied, and we were hearing about people that were seeing this like 20th generation of this thing on VCR, and it just took off in LA, and I think partly too because we didn't put our names on it. Everyone's like, "Who did this? Who did this?" And then all of a sudden, we were in meetings talking to people who wanted to see it as a show.
I especially love the musical episodes of the show and the music, the songs that have been in your movies. So I thought I'd play a scene from a recent musical episode, and this was a parody of High School Musical, and your episode was called Elementary School, the musical.
Elementary School Musical.
Elementary School Musical, yeah. And all the kids sing in groups, but one kid, Bryden, decides he doesn't want to sing. So he really wants to play basketball, but he's afraid it will make him unpopular to play basketball, which is, of course, really funny. So he goes home and he confesses to his parents that he'd rather play basketball than sing. And so here's that scene. He's at the dinner table with his parents. It's a topsy-turvy world. That is so funny. I love the father kind of singing instead of talking. Trey, I get the impression you really love musicals.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I didn't even have, growing up sort of in the foothills of Colorado, I definitely didn't have much of a theater experience to be able to have. But it was because we had this little playhouse. It was called the Evergreen Players, and it was this little 40-seat theater, and it was always one of your teachers and the guy that worked at the gas station and the librarian that were always, cast in whatever musical and doing it. And that was my exposure to all the great musicals, were seeing it that way. And that's why I fell in love with them so much, because it was just like I knew all these people and they were always putting on a different show every couple months. And that's how I learned what all the great musicals were. It wasn't until I was about 20 that I actually came up to New York and saw a real musical.
One of the more controversial episodes you did was the Scientology episode that was called In the Closet?
Mm-hmm.
Trapped in the Closet.
Trapped in the Closet, yeah. And it was actually a very funny episode where Stan is because Stan goes to a Scientology personality test and he scores so well on it, he's seen as the second coming of L. Ron Hubbard. And because Tom Cruise is a Scientologist, Tom Cruise pays a visit to Stan's home and is so disappointed to hear that Stan doesn't think that Tom Cruise is as good an actor as Leonardo DiCaprio or the dude who plays Napoleon Dynamite. So crestfallen, Tom Cruise walks into Stan's bedroom closet. And here's what happens. So that's a scene from the Trapped in the Closet episode of South Park. My guests are the creators of the show, Trey Parker and Matt Stone. So you ran into real trouble with this episode. You were afraid you'd get sued, I think, by the Scientologists, but it was actually, I think, Tom Cruise's people that asked for the show to be pulled.
We're pretty sure.
We're pretty sure.
And in fact, yeah, I think it was.
We can't legally say that, but yeah, we think it was.
Yes. But yes.
Yes,
Legally.
we think it was. That's about what we can say legally, I think. But it was a show that it pushed a lot of buttons.
It was a show that also I think the only reason we got it on the air was because we do this show so close to the deadline that we actually stay up. Our show airs Wednesday night at 10, and we usually are up all night, us and our entire crew up all night the night before finishing. So we'll literally finish the show at noon on Wednesday, and then it airs just a few hours later. So that we basically, Comedy Central Legal looks at our show, and Comedy Central Standards and Practices look at our show. But there's a lot of people that literally, like, it just doesn't have time for somebody to watch it, from beginning to end, because it just gets there and then goes on the air. And Legal and Standards have given it their okay. And Legal worked with us on that show, and they said, this is fine. This is satire. It's protected, and we feel safe about this. And then it went on the air, and it was kind of like all hell broke loose, because Mission Impossible 3 was coming out that summer, and a Scientologist started calling, I think, Viacom. But what really happened was a few months later, it kind of died down. The episode was supposed to be rerun, just in its normal rerun time. And all of a sudden, they called me and Trey, and they said, we're going to pull that out of rotation, that episode. And we're like, why? And they're like, well, because certain producers on Mission Impossible 3 would rather not have it on the air. And, our attitude, and then they told us that we had to be quiet, and that was a little tough. But we kind of, again, talking about our history on the show, it's not something that would have been able to have happened in the first season of the show. But whenever Trapped in the Closet came on, we're like, this isn't going to work. People are going to find out. And, with the internet, as soon as that was pulled out of rotation, internet boards started going crazy and people figured it out and it became a news story. But so we didn't have to do anything. So it's really interesting that the internet really kind of was the thing that broke that story.
So it has been back on the air.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's been back on the air and of course it made it the most, like you said, like notorious. You're asking us about it.
Yeah.
It's it's like the DVD sold crazy. People watch it online all the time. Making the story of it backfired.
Well, I think the last line of that episode is something like, "We'll sue you."
Yeah.
So were you?
And Stan saying, "Go ahead, sue me."
Yeah.
Were you sued by Scientologists after that
Nope.
episode?
No. And that's the thing. We sort of, it was pretty cool because it was one of those episodes where we actually worked pretty closely with the lawyers at Viacom, and the lawyers were kind of into it. It was like, let's do this challenge of doing this and make it unsuable. And they got into that. They're like, no, this kind of sounds fun. And we got in very, there was a few things where it's like, okay, you cannot say this word.
Right.
You can't say pyramid
for instance,
scheme.
They wouldn't let us say pyramid scheme. They wouldn't let us say that Scientology is a pyramid scheme. Now, we're not saying that right now on the radio. They wouldn't let us. So we worked with lawyers, and because it's also a big the show also worked on a meta level of, if you know that Scientology has litigious personality, then you know that we were playing with that very personality of Scientology. It was really fun.
Now the Tom Cruise part where Tom Cruise is in the closet. You're playing on a rumor that was circulating that Tom Cruise was really gay. So, did you have any reservations about playing with that rumor, knowing that it might be hurtful to Tom Cruise?
Since South Park is satire and it's parody, we like putting true rumors in all the time.
True rumors. Trumors, we call it.
We call them trumors.
I mean, that joke was more like, here's a bad joke. Because you could just, it's like, okay, but you're saying he's gay. It's like, no, we're just saying he's in the closet. And you're playing upon that rumor, but you're really just playing a bad joke over and over and getting mileage out of it.
Okay, so I want to ask you now about political satire that you've done. You did, let's go back to season 9 for this, another famous episode. This is from Best Friends Forever. This was your take basically on the Terri Schiavo story about her, big controversy about whether she should be taken off life support or not. And in this episode, Heaven needs Kenny's help because Kenny did so well on a video game, defeating a dark empire in a Keanu Reeves video, that the Angels thinks he can be their Keanu Reeves and bring down Satan's army. So Kenny dies, but he's brought back to life, and he's on a feeding tube. And doctors say that he's in a persistent vegetative state, and they can keep Kenny in the state of a tomato indefinitely with the help of the feeding tube. So Heaven's really upset because now they can't have Kenny on their side. But, then there's this movement to get the feeding tube taken out, and then Satan gets really upset because that means that Heaven might defeat Satan. So Heaven wants him dead, Satan wants him alive, and here's Satan talking with his assistant. What happens next in the scene is that Satan's assistant goes to a press conference being held by a Republican congressman and whispers in the Republican congressman's ear the things that the congressman should say. That's a really, really funny scene. Now, people are always confused about whether you're liberal or conservative, since you mock all political.
Yeah, we're confused
sides.
too.
Yeah,
We're working out our confusion on the air.
We're really jealous of all these people that really seem
Know
to
what
have
they are.
figured it out because we're pretty confused.
Yeah.
Seriously, are you political?
Well, we talk about it. I mean, it's interesting, and it becomes we're adults that live in the world, but I don't think we're not very overtly. We're not really overtly political. Like, I guess our political attitude is South Park's bigger than both the Republicans and the Democrats. And of course, that's a ridiculous statement to everyone in the world but me and Trey. It's more like our show is more important than any. We would hate the show to feel like, oh, this is where we put our politics in because we want this side to win. We like working out our stuff on, in the show, and we like talking about those issues and talking about the emotions behind the issues, especially because that's where a lot of the fodder comes from. But we would never want people to think that this show's a Democrat show or a Republican show and vote this way because of this. That's just like it feels dishonest to the show,
And it's just like where so many episodes are like this side of an issue and that side of an issue, and they're all yelling at each other and calling each other evil and stupid, and the boys are in the middle going, God, just both of you shut up. There's a reason the show's like that. It's because that's basically who we are.
I mean, the end of that show, Kenny, who's playing Terry Schiavo, is just like, whatever you do is fine. Just don't put me on TV. And there was a whole, that entire episode of Terry Schiavo, you're just looking at this poor woman who's on, at the very least, it's like a really complex issue, but like quit showing her face on TV in the worst possible way, over and over. And it just felt like that was an emotional, like we like to find the thing at the end that we can like a third kind of way that and sometimes it's ridiculous and sometimes it's kind of fun, but it's never like prescriptive. It's never like, hey, we think the world should do this, because we don't know. And it's a cartoon, by the way. So... And I also think I don't really think we're conservative. I mean, look at that clip you just played from the Terry Schiavo show. But liberals I think that compared to most of Hollywood, maybe we are a little conservative.
Because we will rip on liberals. And most people really have an agenda to,
it's just not that funny when
push
you
their
rip on
liberal agenda on their show.
Yeah, and it's just really not, they don't really think it's that funny when the joke's on them. Team America's a good example. We always thought that movie would be funny to start the movie like Charlton Heston is directing it, and then end, or the other way around. Start it like Michael Moore's directing it, then end it like Charlton Heston's directing it, and kind of rip on everybody. And people, I've never saw it in screenings I went, but people told me about screenings where in Berkeley or in New York City where the crowd's just going crazy for the first half, and then the laughs just kind of like dwindle,
and then people start walking out.
Yeah,
and it was because it does take a turn, and all of a sudden we start ripping on liberals.
That makes me laugh the most.
And it was, because it came out around election time. That's when we got, the letter from Sean Penn saying, "How dare you make this movie in support of George Bush?" And we're like, "What are you?
Did you see the movie?
Did you see it?" He was just pissed off that we put him in the movie and made fun of him. That's all he's pissed off of.
There have been several, I think, academic books written about South Park. What's the most what you consider to be tortured intellectual comment about South Park that you've ever read?
I remember one time I think there was an early review that was, we were just like after the first show came out, like we were reviewed in the Washington Post or something. Like, and we looked at the review and it was like, well, there are some funny bits, but it doesn't deal with the nihilism of suburban life the way Beavis and Butthead does, or the complexities of the American family like The Simpsons does. And we're like, wow, that's what you see in Beavis and Butthead? Like, I didn't really get all of that. There's some really egghead stuff that people have written about South Park, but I guess for us, it's always every season is kind of like we're a band and we're going in and we're doing a new album.
Were you surprised in 2005 that after many years of poo jokes and obscenities that you were honored with perhaps the highest honor in broadcasting, the Peabody Award?
Yeah, we were surprised. Yeah,
we were a little surprised. Yeah, that we would.
Although it did come after it was a crazy season, and it was around the time of the Scientology episode and like the Imagination Land episode where. I mean, we do take pride in our work. We do work very, very hard, and we do love the craft of writing, and we do talk about it constantly, and we do our homework. We really do, and so, it's still, no matter how long we've been doing it, a lot of people think that they've always thought that basically we just get high and do stuff, and it becomes a show. And
I wish
it's just such the opposite. Yeah. It's like when we're in a season. It's this insane grind, and our brains are hurting, and we're working really hard because we want the shows to be really good, and we don't accept, mediocrity. We get mad at ourselves when we feel like we've done something poorly and we try it again.
I mean, the thing with the Peabody and the Emmy, the first time we were nominated for Emmy, we had to get over that feeling of like, no. That's like, we're the punk rock band. We're the people that flip our finger at the establishment kind of thing. And then so the first time you get an Emmy, you're kind of like, oh, that doesn't really fit us. But
it's like
kind of grudgingly
student of the month.
Yeah, like student of the month. You're like, I don't want to be student of the month. And then eventually, like, that's pretty cool.
What did you say at the ceremony?
We
just talked about how sweet Battlestar Galactica was because they got one too.
Battlestar Galactica got one, and that was the first season of that show, which was phenomenal. So we dedicated our award to Battlestar Galactica.
Because remember when we learned that we got a Peabody, we're like, we got a Peabody, and we're like, what else got a Peabody? And we're like, Battlestar Galactica, and we're like, we didn't even know there was a new one out. We're like, what? And then we got the DVDs and like watched them all back to back, and we're like, whoa, this is really good. So then we just talked about how good that show was.
Yep, that's what we did.
Well, I want to congratulate you on your 200th episode. And I want to thank you very much for coming here and talking with us.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you.